Many people claim that women sometimes misrepresent themselves and do not look as attractive in person as they do in their pictures. This often happens when meeting someone from a dating app. I'm curious, men, have you ever met someone who appeared more attractive in real life? Did you express that to her? Why or why not? Story 1. The last girl I met from the apps had some average pictures. She was pretty, but not exceptionally so. When I met her in person, she was incredibly beautiful and graceful, and it still physically hurts to think about. I messed that opportunity up badly. In addition to telling her she was more funny and interesting than I anticipated, I essentially told her that she was so attractive that it hurt. I probably shouldn't have because I think in the early stages of things, it put us on uneven grounds. Story 2. I met a girl on Tinder that I really liked, but her photos were questionable. She had some with the duck lips pose and odd angles. She was obviously pretty, but I thought it was too good to be true. We went on a date and I barely recognized her. She turned out to be one of the most beautiful girls I have ever seen. That was almost 8 years ago, and we have been married for 6 years. Story 3. It was honestly about 50-50 when I was on dating apps that a girl showed up prettier or less pretty than her profile. I like bigger girls, so it was never a negative if they were heavier, but honestly, the bigger girls were the ones double-checking that I saw their belly in pictures because they didn't want to be ghosted. Like, no, I saw the belly, that's why I'm here. But some girls, like one of my exes, severely downplayed their appearance on the app out of body dysmorphia or getting tired of superficial guys. She had breasts the size of watermelons and the tightest little runner's physique. But you'd have thought she was much less attractive based on her profile. The only reason I swiped right was that she was pretty upfront about loving bigger guys who can cook and cuddle. And I thought, well, I have to show love in return. Only one girl ever showed up significantly worse than she appeared on her profile. It was obvious she had heavily edited her pictures. She was a little on the chubby side but devoid of curves. Her hair was frizzy as if she had fallen asleep with a blow dryer, her teeth were discolored, and she had noticeable acne. Honestly, if she hadn't been such a hardcore religious person, which caught me off guard because she mentioned disliking religion in her bio, I would have thought she was using drugs. That date ended almost as soon as I could find a polite way to leave. Story 4. I went on a date with a girl from Hinge who just didn't photograph well. I hate to use number grades when referring to people, but her photos were maybe a 5 out of 10. I figured, what the hell? She seems okay. Might as well give her a chance. When she showed up for the date, I was floored because she was easily an 8 or 9. That said, she also had a lot going for her beyond her appearance. She was a singer and played the flute in the local symphony in addition to being a nurse. She was super smart, funny, and charismatic. She had a variety of interests that meshed with mine too, so by the end of the date, I was pretty much smitten. I dated her for a few months before she left because she wanted to try with a different guy she had been pining for. She was gentle about it, even though it hurt to hear. I still think about her a lot because she was such a cool person, just not very photogenic. If by some chance you're reading this, Kristen, I hope you're out there still being awesome. Story 5. I did. We dated for a few months. It wasn't a match, but it was surprising in a good way. So often, it was the opposite. Story 6. My ex looked fine in her photos, but even more like a young model in person. She doesn't photograph nearly as well because she has some masculine facial features. I told her she looked better in person on our first date, and she took it as a compliment. I'm sure she knew she was very attractive already. Story 7. My wife's photos weren't as flattering as her in-person appearance. I never told her this because it could be perceived as saying, "You don't look good in pictures." Story 8. The woman who doesn't care much about pictures looks significantly more attractive in real life, which emphasizes that life exists beyond the internet and social platforms. Those who focus on followers spend their time filtering photos. Story 9. Maybe once, the woman seemed fairly plain in her photos, but I liked her personality. When she showed up, I was surprised. She was at least 2 levels more attractive than her online pictures. It was quite intimidating because she also had a fantastic personality. Story 10. Yes, the girl made a great first impression. Kindness, humor, a nice smile, and positive energy can make a girl more attractive right away. No, I didn't say anything. Story 11, my girlfriend. I thought she was attractive based on her photos, and she was definitely my type with common interests. When she stepped out of her car, I was in awe. I couldn't believe how stunning she was. She turned out to be the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, and also the best partner, friend, and companion. She's utterly perfect. After nearly 3 years together, I plan to propose as soon as I can afford a ring. Story 12. Interestingly, I believe the appeal of online dating photos relates less to the attractiveness of the person and more to the vibe they convey. I met a woman whose pictures were initially underwhelming. She appeared stern and somewhat aloof. However, when we met, I discovered she had the most infectious laugh and warmth. In person, there was a light and energy that simply doesn't translate through a still image. I didn't mention the photo disparity. I just enjoyed the unexpected depth of her character. This demonstrates that sometimes a picture is merely a placeholder for the real thing. Story 13. It only happened once about 9 years ago on Plenty of Fish. She looked cute in her pictures, had an awesome personality, and a great sense of humor. When I picked her up for our first date, I was amazed at how stunning she was in person. A few weeks later, I mentioned that while her pictures showed her as pretty, I was surprised at how much more attractive she was in reality. Luckily, she took it well and was flattered. We got married about 5 years ago. Story 14. My ex didn't have great photos on her dating profile, and I questioned whether I was attracted to her and if it was worth going on a date. Figured, why not? Let's see what happens. Turned out she was more attractive in person. I didn't say anything, though, even though we are not together anymore. Story 15. I married her. Longer story. I was on dating sites in the early 2010s after a divorce in my mid-20s. I received a message while I was at work one Saturday from a girl I had seen on Match, but her pictures only showed her face. However, her message was very intriguing, much more engaging than many other girls I had contacted. Intrigued, I replied, and we hit it off. About a week later, we met, and she absolutely blew me away. Standing at 6 feet 2 inches, with long, luscious black hair, thick and curvy in all the right places. A former collegiate athlete and later a Navy veteran, she was an unstoppable force of a woman. I fell hard instantly. We have been married for 9 years next month and have 2 amazing boys. Every dream I ever had for my life has come true. She is an incredible wife and an even better mother to those boys. Story 16. I don't understand how people can't spot filters. Most individuals do choose the most flattering pictures, but I've never encountered one that looked wildly different. However, I also don't match with those who post heavily filtered images. One girl I met was much prettier than she appeared because her pictures were just fun and casual rather than trying to look attractive. Story 17. I've always thought that edits would be obvious and I would notice them in real life, but that's not always the case. Edits can be really subtle. I used to attribute it to the girls having a good day, but I've seen a few girls edit their photos, though not at the level of catfishing, so I know it's not always the case. I never say anything because I think it's rude, and most edits are minor anyway. I did meet one girl who edited her photos more than any other girl I've met, though not to the extreme you see people posting about. I told her, "Wow, you're a lot different than what I thought." And she quickly shot back, "How so?" in a somewhat angry tone, so I think she was reflecting on that. I then made something up unrelated to avoid discussing it. Story 18. I had this experience with my current girlfriend. She just can't take a good picture. I decided to meet mainly because of our similar interests and didn't pay much attention to the photos. I did look at them and decided to take a gamble. Turns out she is really attractive. Story 19. A couple of the girls I met through dating apps were more attractive than their pictures suggested. I didn't mention it first, but one of my dates noted that she was surprised I recognized her because she had dyed her hair and lost some weight since her photos. Story 20. The girl I'm dating is great, but to be honest, I never noticed until I came across this post. When I met her, I thought, wow, she's cute and looks like my type, but I can't remember at all what she had on her profile. Story 21. My girlfriend was attractive in real life. Her pictures didn't prepare me for how much as she dislikes cameras and having her picture taken. We discussed it much later after we had been together for a while. Story 22. I met someone, and the way she walked in, all shy and playing with her hair, made me feel infatuated. I kissed her, got away with it, and she just embraced it. She was definitely better than her photos. Story 23. A girl I've been on a couple of dates with from Hinge had good photos, but when I met her in person for the first time, I was blown away. Our next date was a late-night dinner after she had been studying all day. She showed up in workout clothes and minimal makeup, and she looked even better. I went back to her profile to read over some of our old messages the other day when it hit me. I really need to do better about complimenting her instead of speaking about her on the internet. Story 24. My last girlfriend was like that. She did not take photos well. At one point, while we were drinking, I told her I thought she looked better in person than in her photos, and she got really upset because it was one of her insecurities. However, that was our only argument, and we laughed it off later. Unfortunately, she ended up getting sick and passing away a couple of years later, but she was definitely the one for me. Story 25. I feel like a catfish on my Instagram. It's not because I edit my photos. I just think that lighting and angles make a big difference. It's also a curated depiction of me. However, on every first date I've been on, the guy has said he's surprised that I look better than my pictures. I don't know, maybe they're just being nice because I don't see it. Story 26. My now wife's Tinder photos were good, but they were nowhere near as impressive as she looked in real life. Thankfully, I managed to keep my jaw from hitting the ground. I didn't tell her right away, but I did eventually. Story 27. Often, many women do not photograph well or do not know how to choose flattering photos, selecting ones that are meaningful to them instead. Story 28. It has happened to me frequently that most of the girls from dating apps I have met looked better in real life, mostly due to poor pictures. I do mention it at some point. Story 29. When I met my wife, I felt she was prettier than in the pictures. However, I didn't mention this on the first date when you're supposed to play it cool. The first time I used the line, "Wow, you're even prettier in real life," I could see her wince a bit, and I don't think I ever really won her over. In fact, being too complimentary to a woman on the first date seems to be a bad idea in my experience. Story 30. Almost every time, I find a woman more attractive in person than on her profile. I believe this is due to both physical attributes, as real life is often more flattering, and emotional factors. Personality and various fun, cute, and endearing mannerisms significantly enhance a person's attractiveness. I tend to swipe left on most women who use filters, excessive makeup, or showcase classy dresses in fancy settings, especially if they clearly avoid full-body pictures unless they seem genuinely interesting in their bios. Typically, those who rely on filters or heavy makeup are not the most intriguing individuals. I think people with diverse hobbies and interests tend to be more engaged in stimulating activities rather than focusing on how others perceive them. So, to the other men out there, if you feel like you are often being misled by profiles, take some time for introspection and consider that you might be making poor choices while swiping. Story 31. It used to happen a lot in the past, but not so much anymore. It would often serve as an excuse to give a compliment. "Wow, you are prettier than your pictures. Your pictures don't do you justice. You need to fire your photographer." Story 32. I met her on eHarmony, and we talked for hours. The first time I met her, I knocked on the door, and she opened it. I almost turned around and walked away. She was way out of my league and drop-dead gorgeous. However, I stayed, and we spent that weekend and every weekend after together. We have been married for 13 years and have triplet daughters. She is still way out of my league. I absolutely told her, and I still tell her every chance I get. Story 33. My girlfriend looked amazing in the photos and was even more stunning in person. I found it difficult to maintain eye contact without blushing because she was so beautiful. I was worried I messed up our first date because of it, but I'm glad she found it endearing. I also didn't follow the rule of waiting a while before scheduling the next date and did it just 3 hours after our date finished. We are approaching 6 years together, and thankfully I can now maintain eye contact, even though she has only gotten more beautiful. Story 34. I met a girl a few years ago who intentionally posted unflattering photos of herself on her dating profile. I was shocked when I met her. She explained that it was a way to filter out those who only date women based on looks. Story 35. No, quite the opposite. My last two meetups were with women who looked young, slim, and beautiful in their photos. They both used old pictures. One was overweight and didn't even try to look nice for our date. However, she ended up paying, which was nice. The other gave me her number so we could meet again, and the social media platform suggested that I might know her. I checked, and all her pictures on her dating profile were taken 5 to 10 years ago. I mentioned this to her, and she asked if I was disappointed. I honestly said I was, and while I found her attractive, it was clear in person that she did not resemble her photos. She became upset and told me not to text her again. Situation avoided. Phew. Story 36. Yes, but this girl only posted pictures of herself going out. She really went overboard with the makeup. I thought it looked unappealing, and she looked much better when toned down and more natural. So when we met for a drink after work, I thought, wow, this girl is gorgeous. A few dates later, we went to a show, and she wore the loud, eccentric makeup again. I never figured out how to tell her. Story 37. It happened one time for me over 10 years ago. I organized to meet up with someone who looked cool based on her photos, but she turned out to be average in person. As I was driving to her place, I saw an absolute stunner on the side of the road. It was her, and I felt overwhelmed and slightly awkward, but things went well for a few weeks. Every other person I met online was worse than their photos, but I probably was too. Story 38. I saw her in my office during my work-from-home setup. I only occasionally saw her on the company-supplied webcams during meetings. When I met her outside, I was taken aback. She was incredibly beautiful, had an amazing sense of fashion, and exuded confidence. Story 39. It happened to me. I ended up marrying her. My wife had cute pictures, but when she walked into the bar to meet me, I thought I would never get a second date because she was so incredibly attractive and I considered myself just average. It worked out well for me, I would say. I don't think I told her. I just went with the flow. Story 40. I met my wife in person and there are very few pictures of her. She despises getting her photo taken, and I understand why. In person, she looks amazing. However, when taking a photo of her, you really need to find the right angle. Otherwise, her face can appear flatter, and the photo tends to be unflattering. Story 41. I have been using dating apps for a couple of years. I rarely pursue anyone from them, but I matched with a woman I got along with well. She looked pretty in her pictures, but they didn't do her justice. In person, she was stunning. I realized I wasn't ready for something as serious as she was, as I was still recovering from an abusive marriage. So we parted ways. Suitable partners are out there, but you have to sort through many options to find them. Story 42. Happened with my wife, though it wasn't immediate. We started dating in the winter, and her pictures were pretty conservative, so even after the first few dates, I didn't have a clear idea of what her figure looked like since we were both bundled up whenever we met. I guess I just formed a mental image of it being fairly plain. Anyway, we decided to go to a fancy restaurant for dinner on our fourth date. When I went to pick her up, she answered the door in a deep-cut skinny red dress, looking like a supermodel, and I was absolutely floored. I remember saying, "Oh my God," and standing there staring for a few moments, which kind of freaked her out, thinking something was wrong. I had to reassure her that nothing was wrong. I was just so caught off guard by how beautiful she looked, since I never really got a good look at her body before. Completely stunned me to see it for the first time. She became embarrassed and turned almost as red as her dress, but otherwise took it well and didn't get mad or offended. Story 43. She's married to my childhood best friend now. There's no drama, no crazy story. She met him much later and didn't know. I didn't know until I visited my hometown. She's actually a really down-to-earth and incredibly nice person. It just is what it is. Story 44. I've been on a few dates with a girl I met through dating apps. Her pictures were okay, but seeing her in person was so much better. It might have been her freckles. I don't know, but she has captured my interest. Story 45. I was fortunate to meet a girl who had just reached her peak physical fitness, but despite her cool pictures from traveling, she was a little chubby. That was a pleasant surprise. Story 46. Only once in all my dating life was I in my teens. Before social media was everywhere and phone calls were the primary means of communication. She sent a couple of photos with a love letter, old school handwritten and sprayed with perfume. I thought she was cute, like the girl next door. We met in real life a couple of months later, and wow, she was stunning. We had already mentally and emotionally bonded, so my insecurities were minimal. I confessed several days later how breathtakingly gorgeous I found her. Surprisingly, she said similar things about me, expressing her insecurities about me being out of her league. No way. We dated for about 18 months. Story 47. My first online date was more attractive in person. I was already nervous, and I inwardly sighed when I saw her walking up. Story 48. I tested this last year. I went on many dates with women I felt I was somewhat attracted to. I thought my photos weren't great, and perhaps some of these women looked better in person. However, I found that every single woman I dated was less attractive than her photos. On my last date, I wouldn't have recognized her if she hadn't been the only other woman there. We met at a cafe and went for a walk. That was frustrating, and I felt like I was wasting my time. I have changed my approach drastically and am now much more selective. I go on fewer dates, but I do not feel like I am wasting my time. Getting lots of matches with women you aren't attracted to is pointless. Story 49. I'm a woman who doesn't picture well at all. A guy I met was shocked when he met me. He texted me that night saying he wasn't ready for how attractive I was. Story 50. I once went on a date with a woman who had pictures of cities and only one of her face, wearing sunglasses from a distance and in poor quality. However, she was lovely, and I figured she was either shy, insecure, or had a strong sense of integrity. I was right. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, and we have been together for 10 years and have 2 children. Story 51. I couldn't even speak. I just stammered. When I say this woman was a perfect 10, she truly was. She was stunning, funny, and sweet. I found out she had just returned to Tinder after years away and hadn't updated her profile. I was a recent match. I may not often have girlfriends, but I definitely considered her a great catch. We both understood it was a purely physical relationship. Story 52. I have only been reverse catfished once. Her pictures were average, maybe a little chubby. She showed up, and I didn't recognize her. She had lost a fair amount of weight and looked stunning. We had drinks and afterwards exchanged a hug. I could tell she was waiting for me to make a move for a kiss. For some reason, I hesitated, and on the next date, the magic was gone and the chemistry wasn't there. She was a single mother, and looking back, she probably just wanted a casual encounter. Story 53. I know a girl who never looks good in pictures. Some say a picture can show a person's soul. She is a bit quirky. Story 54. I'm gay, and the other night I was on a dating app. A guy with a great body and impressive endowment was about half a mile away. I invited him to my place, and he came over shortly after. I was amazed when he arrived. He had a perfect body, a great smile, and a wonderful personality, with a much larger endowment than it seemed in his pictures. I didn't say anything because the normal photo suited his personality so well. He was carefree, not a perfectionist, just happy to be himself. Anyway, he helped me with my husband, and he didn't block me after he left, so I think it went really well. I'll probably invite him over again if he's nearby. This man is the textbook definition of underpromise and overdeliver, and I'm kind of into it, especially since it's often the opposite. Story 55. I first saw a picture of the woman who would become my wife when her friend showed me a random photo on her phone. It was just an ordinary candid shot, so it didn't make much effort to be impressive. My wife often jokes about that being the picture shown to me. Story 56. I have found this happening more often than the reverse. I mentioned it to someone I was seeing a while ago. I can't remember what she said, but her pictures weren't that bad either, just not the best. Story 57. People have seen pictures of my wife and do not say much besides that we make a cute couple. However, the number of people who tell me, "Wow, your wife is beautiful," when they meet her is amazing. Story 58. My current girlfriend is a geologist, and she wanted photos that represent her passions. Most of the photos feature her in a cold lab with equipment or from a distance on a golf course. In those pictures, she looked quite pale. When I arrived for our date, this stunning woman approached me. She seemed far out of my league. I told her weeks later, and she always feels embarrassed by it. She never realized how different she looked. Story 59. I have only met two girls who looked better than their pictures, but in both cases, they just didn't know how to take photos. They appeared unflattering in their Instagram pictures and looked average in person. Story 60. I'm not a man, but people usually tell me that when I show up, I look better than my photos. I actually hear it a lot. Sometimes it makes me feel bad about myself. Story 61. I told her how I felt the first time I saw her walk through the door years later. We are married now. About a decade ago on Tinder, most people either looked exactly like their pictures or not quite as good, and many bios seemed like copies of each other. But this one woman had two pictures that were not bad but not great, and a short, simple, yet unique bio. She was a big question mark, so I figured, why not? Worst case, I would go out and have some drinks with someone uninteresting. She was not uninteresting, and she looked amazing. I am sure my pulse raced when she looked at me, smiled that room-brightening smile, and waved. Story 62. I thought she looked okay on her profile, and when we met for the date, she was gorgeous. I was kind of nervous but calmed down. We seemed to hit it off and both had fun. But she didn't want to see me again. My speculation is that it was because she was slightly taller than me, and I'm 6 feet tall. Only because she wore shoes that made her taller. I think she wanted to match her height with mine but overestimated or something. She said she was busy with life and didn't have as much time to date as she thought. Oh well. Story 63. My girlfriend's profile picture on Instagram is a strangely cropped image of her face in a family photo. She has made only one post in the last 2 years since we met. She is absolutely stunning, but you wouldn't know that because the post is about her birthday makeup at a concert, and she doesn't even look like herself in it. Story 64. When I told a woman on our first date that she was much more attractive in real life, she angrily replied that she does not photograph well and never contacted me again. Story 65. I saw a girl on Hinge who was okay, but she had a lot of strange pictures with many filters and close-ups. I'm open to going on dates to see how it goes. She was attractive and resembled Mandy Muse with curly hair. We hooked up for a little while, but it didn't work out because she seemed somewhat detached and wasn't very interesting to talk to. Story 66. More often than the opposite, I have been quite open to dating people who don't even look average in pictures. I think my last 2 serious relationships were like that as well. I also tried dating someone who looked super sexy, so I didn't intend for it to become serious. She had plans to move to Singapore, but in reality, she was just cute and had an embracing aura and charm. She was incredibly fun, and I ended up falling in love when I didn't want to, which left me more heartbroken than ever. Story 67. My husband said he was pleasantly surprised that I actually looked like my pictures. I guess that's at least halfway there with this post. Story 68. I met a woman online in 2006 who had short, curly hair in her pictures. I am not a fan of short or curly hair, so when she showed up with long, straight hair, I thought she looked much better than in her online pictures. I married her a year later, and we are still together today. Story 69. This is me. I am that woman. I am not very photogenic, and I remember wondering if the guy I went out with was disappointed when we met. Later, I jokingly mentioned that I hoped this wasn't the case. He genuinely told me that it was better than he expected. I was pleasantly surprised. Story 70. When I was single and young, I used less flattering photos of myself for 2 reasons: to weed out the obvious men who were only interested in physical relationships and to pleasantly surprise them when we met in person. I was with one guy for 8 years. Story 71. A long time ago, I was video chatting with a woman from Iran. She was nice looking, with a nice figure, and I would rate her a solid 7. When I finally met her in person while traveling, she was stunning. Unfortunately, her camera distorted her face, making her proportions feel off. She had the most aesthetically perfect figure of any woman I've ever been with. Story 72. I would say that this was the case with my girlfriend. She was attractive in her photos, but even more so in real life. I was very excited when we met for the first time. I've always thought she could have enhanced her profile a bit. Not that she used bad photos, but she could certainly present herself in a better light, if that makes sense. She's really beautiful and just used generic photos of herself, some of which were a bit outdated. For example, some of the photos she has taken since we've been dating would stand out on a dating app, in my opinion. I'm just glad to have met her. I've been deceived online before, and it's a horrible feeling all around and creates a very uncomfortable vibe. I told her that when I first saw her, I was thinking, please let this woman I'm approaching be my date. It would be really awkward to approach another random girl on the street, only to find out that my actual date is standing a few feet away. As I said, she was more beautiful than her photos. For a split second, I hesitated, wondering if the woman I was approaching was actually her and not someone else. A reverse catfish, I guess, but not the worst-case scenario. Story 73. It's very rare, but it has happened. I think women get caught up in makeup and filters and forget that men find them attractive without all that. Story 74. Once in my 200 meetups has this occurred. Her smile was amazing, and her pictures did her no justice. She had just gotten out of an 8-year relationship, so I guess she wasn't confident with her picture selection. That fact only made her even more attractive. Story 75. It only happened once for me. She tapped my shoulder, and when I turned around and saw her, I was just shocked. I stumbled over my words. It was kind of embarrassing, but she laughed, and the only thing I could think of saying was, "Holy cow, wow." The rest of the night, every time I looked at her, I couldn't help but smile, and she would blush. I ended up dating her for about 3 years. During that time, we only fought 1 or 2 times. It's hard to argue with someone that pretty. We still talk, but in the end, I was going in a different direction in my life and was too young and foolish to realize I had a keeper. It's anticlimactic, but it's my one time that someone whose pictures did them no justice. Story 76. She wasn't hotter, but was unequivocally more attractive. She was a cheerleader for the Atlanta Hawks, a dancer for the Georgia Force, and did a great deal of print modeling. Neither of those even remotely compared to her kindness, femininity, generosity, and love of family. Story 77. I met a guy through Facebook and we talked for months before we finally met. On our first date, he told me I was much prettier than my photos. I felt relieved and reassured by his compliment, especially since I had often heard that girls do not look as good as their pictures. I was glad to know he did not think that way about me. I didn't take his comment as an insult at all. Story 78. In my opinion, most women appear more attractive when they are not wearing clothes. Exceptions generally involve those wearing shapewear. To me, more attractive describes my individual response and arousal. Additionally, most women do not send me intimate photos before a first date. With everyone I have had a third date with, I eventually saw them nude. I did not explicitly tell them they were more attractive in person than in their pictures, but they understood that I had a positive response. Story 79. My wife looked different in each of her app pictures, which was definitely a pleasant surprise when we met in person. Story 80. Not a dating app, but someone I met on Reddit just to chat with. Her profile image was generated from a painting of her and was so unbelievable that I dismissed it. We progressed from direct messages to texts, emails, and phone calls, eventually leading to a video call. When she turned on her video, I literally stopped breathing and couldn't speak. I stared like an idiot. She was easily one of the most beautiful people I have ever seen, and I have seen quite a few. She was calm and classy, didn't say a word, and watched me compose myself. Then we resumed as if nothing had happened. Story 81. I met my now wife on Tinder 8 years ago in September. She only had one picture which had a bumblebee filter on it. The rest were pictures of beer and a pizza. The first time we hung out and I saw her in person, I was blown away. I never would have thought someone so beautiful and attractive would be into me and stick with me for this long. Story 82. I am a 35-year-old woman who was told multiple times on first dates that I was the opposite of a catfish. I purposely used very average pictures of myself, ensuring I appeared less fit and wore little to no makeup. It's good to compliment people for being genuine. This behavior should be encouraged. Story 83. One special time for me. A conventionally chubby girl with an average face appeared in her picture, but her facial expressions, eyes, and smile were truly captivating and impressive. Unfortunately, she was a self-centered individual, but her overall presence was more appealing in person than in the photos. Story 84. Unfortunately, once she knows you like her, it's game over. Unless she had those feelings first for a while and couldn't figure out if you were a yes or no. A substantial wallet probably would have helped too. Story 85. I took my girl to the beach. We made out as the surf rolled in, and she was my universe. It was the best year of my life. Story 86. The current friend with benefits is the only time. None of her pictures did a good job of showing off her body. There were also many pictures with different hairstyles, some less flattering than others. I didn't realize until we met in person that she had significant features, and in my opinion, her most flattering hairstyle in her pictures was her current one. I mentioned to her that she had pictures with many different hairstyles in her profile and that her current one was my favorite. Story 87. It was fun. Her photos didn't flatter her, but she was my type the minute I saw her in person. She also had a great bubbly personality. The date was lighthearted and enjoyable. Until I dropped the bombshell that I'm divorced and have children. She instantly switched off after that, just constantly on her phone and giving me one-word replies. I even prompted her if she wanted to know anything about me. She just said no. I was a bit sad and disappointed, but I guess you can't change a person's mind at that point, and I was facing a losing battle. This was after a solid month of chatting on the phone every day, taking the time to build a strong emotional connection. She shared her life, issues, and photos of her family, nieces, and nephews, as well as other daily happenings. I knew a lot about her, but she didn't know much about me. Anyway, I offered her a lift home. She obliged, gave me a hug, and that was that. I never saw or contacted her again. It's a pity. Story 88. It is extremely rare. I can only think of a few times it has happened. Most women are less attractive in person. Story 89. Her Tinder photos were low quality and resembled celebrity incognito paparazzi photos. She wasn't anyone famous, but later told me she just didn't want her colleagues to recognize her on Tinder. She still seemed interesting enough, so I arranged a date and I certainly liked what I saw. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.